Question number 4, Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by the statement in Budget 2016 that GDP per capita is what matters for achieving higher material living standards? And was growth in per capita GDP last year about 0.5%, as stated by the Minister of Economic Development?
0.5%?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, in the long run, yes and yes.
It's a very long way. Supplementary question, Mr.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Can he confirm that Budget 2016 says that GDP per capita growth stays under 1% for 2017?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, I can't confirm that. Treasury advised me that they forecast a lift in per capita GDP to 1.3% over the next few years. So that may have been referring to 2016-17.
Tomorrow with you.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Can he further confirm that GDP per capita growth only rises above 1% in 2018 and 2019, according to this year's budget, and that is on the basis of net immigration levels lowering from the current 70,000 to less than 20,000?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, there'll be a lot of factors involved in rising per capita GDP, just as there have been a lot of factors, and in both cases, some of them global, that has influenced lower per capita GDP. But in an economy that's growing at 3 to 3.5%, with moderate and consistent increases in real incomes, per capita GDP is likely to rise.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is he confident that net immigration will return to the levels predicted in the budget of less than 20,000? And if not, will he concede that this is highly unlikely unless his government heeds the call of everyone from the Reserve Bank Governor to Michael Barnett to the Treasury to the Chief Executive of ANZ Bank and review current immigration settings?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, immigration settings are always under review, and in fact we come across many businesses who want looser immigration settings because their prospects are good, they are investing in their businesses, they're creating more jobs, and they're having trouble getting the skilled people that they need. I hope they do succeed one way or another because that will help lift per capita GDP.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Isn't he getting more and more out of touch on what constitutes meaningful lifts in living standards in New Zealand when commentators are saying that New Zealand's economic growth is driven almost exclusively by rising population? And Dita Adam from the Manufacturers and Exporters Association says we are importing growth rather than creating it.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, whoever that commentator was, should get out and about. There's quite a wide range. In fact, the feature of growth now is that it is driven by growth in exports, by strong growth in the construction sector, by growth in consumption, where we've seen just in the last week the confidence of households is up a bit and they are spending more. So it is fair to say that if you take away all the sources of growth, then there'd be no growth. But in fact, there are a number of sources of growth. A couple of years ago, it was too much dairy. Before that, it was all Christchurch. Now it's too many people wanting to live in New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
When we have the lowest wage growth in 6 years, a housing crisis pushing people to live in cars, and personal household debt at its highest level since before the GFC, doesn't he think it's time to focus on building wealth in New Zealand rather than relying on immigration, speculation and private debt to prop up the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member is simply wrong in his understanding of what's happening in the economy. We're seeing, for instance, the non-dairy export sector grow at quite rapid and what do look like to be nevertheless sustainable rates, creating new jobs and new growth. But the fact that more New Zealanders are staying home and more of them are returning home is a pretty clear indication that when people have the chance to vote with their feet, they're not voting for that member's view of the economy, because if they thought that, they wouldn't come here. They're voting for a positive view of the economy.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Thank you. My question is to the Minister. When the government talks about, quote, achieving higher material living standards, does he think that New Zealanders would consider warm, dry and affordable housing critical to achieving those standards?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure they would, and that's why it's such good news that the Auckland Council has passed a plan which takes what were 8 or 9 different plans, some of which up to 25 years old, and turns them into one plan for Auckland, which enables twice as many houses to be built. That is great news for low and middle income families, because the model that the council's been operating punishes them by making housing more expensive. And over the next 5 to 10 years, that will change.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Are the record levels of homelessness and families being forced to live in cars and garages a sign that the government's achieving higher material living standards for families?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr Speaker, it's a sign that the housing market is dealing with a perfect storm of demand. The lowest interest rates in 50 years, much steadier migration than anyone expected. That is, migration that's gone up and stayed up instead of dropping down, dealing with record number of New Zealanders who are staying home and therefore not packing up their furniture and leaving the house empty. And the government is taking every reasonable measure it can to reduce the pressure on those who are at the bottom of the housing market and need support.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Wouldn't the Minister agree that if his government was succeeding in achieving higher material living standards for families, the numbers of Auckland children with rheumatic fever would be decreasing, not increasing, by 36%?
The Honourable Bill
Well,
English.
Mr Speaker, it's taken the member a while to catch up with what's happening with rheumatic fever, but 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, along with the Māori Party, we put 60 million into a program to reduce rheumatic fever. It takes a complex range of solutions, and I must credit the relevant ministers and public servants who, until quite recently, were succeeding in dropping the rates of rheumatic fever faster than we might have expected. It does look as if that's flattened out, and efforts will be increased to keep ahead, if possible, of that increase.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Isn't it clear that his government policies have failed, because at this rate of increase we will be back to 2014 levels, record high levels of rheumatic fever for children by the end of this year?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I wouldn't want to speculate on that, but I think the member would want the House to understand that rates have been dropping significantly over the last year or two. But even if that is the case, there are still other factors that indicate children are in poor housing, and the government has committed $36 million in the most recent budget to a broader effort to deal with a wider range of children showing up at a hospital with diseases that could be connected to the state of their housing, and galvanising public agencies to take direct action to deal with those cases.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Aren't his government's plans, current failures and plans for the future cold comfort for the families of 45,000 children who are now in poverty under this government, according to the Children's Commissioner? And when will he implement a comprehensive poverty reduction plan to run alongside an economic growth plan to make sure that families will get their fair share?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member's covering a wide range of issues there, but one step in that direction was that on the 1st of April, for the first time in 42 years, those families received a significant increase in their welfare benefit over and above the Consumer Price Index. In fact, up to $25 a week. And I must say, there's any number of families who have told me that while that hasn't dramatically altered their lives, it's helped them deal with the pressure of hardship they were under. The next best thing we can do is follow through on getting more houses built so we can ultimately get their housing costs down.
Question